At the party, one guy is laughing louder than anyone at the table. He just went through a breakup, but tonight he's telling stories, insisting he's never felt more free. The table buys it completely. One person doesn't. They watch the smile stop half a second before it reached his eyes, the small breath he let out after setting his glass down too carefully. Nobody trained them to notice this. They just did. If that's ever been you, this is for you. Some nervous systems come with the gain turned all the way up. Not louder exactly. More like a microphone that picks up the whisper under someone's words. The static under a room's mood. The fine print nobody else bothered reading. It's not a personality quirk. It's a setting you were built with. One that's been there since long before you had words for why certain rooms felt like too much. And once you understand what it's doing, a lot of your life stops looking like a problem and starts looking like a pattern with a reason behind it. This is why many deeply sensitive people look quiet from the outside. They are not empty. They are processing more than the room can see. Here are 7 things that tend to be true about people whose gain runs high. Not a diagnosis, just a mirror. 1. You catch the gap between what people say and what they mean. Words are the smallest part of what a person is actually telling you. Some communication research suggests that when someone's emotional words do not match their tone or body language, people often trust the nonverbal signal more than the words. Most people register the words and move on. You register the pause before the words, the tightness around the eyes, the fingers tapping against a glass, the half-second delay between the joke and the laugh that's supposed to follow it. Your brain runs a quiet comparison. Does the data match? And when it doesn't, something in you flags it instantly, the same way your hand pulls back from heat before you've consciously decided to move it. This makes you a remarkable friend. You notice the bad day someone's pretending not to have, the fight nobody mentioned, the thing that's actually wrong underneath, I'm fine. That makes you a remarkable friend. But it can also make you one of the loneliest people in the room. Because while you're busy clocking everyone else's hidden weather, almost nobody has the same radar pointed back at you. You can go years being the one who reads everyone else perfectly and still feel completely unread yourself. 2. Other people's feelings show up in your body, not just your head. You've cried at a movie you knew wasn't real. You felt your chest tighten sitting next to someone who was angry before they'd said a single word, before you even knew what they were angry about. This isn't you being dramatic. It's a documented phenomenon called emotional contagion. And in people wired this way, it runs at full volume. Watching someone get hurt doesn't just make you sympathetic. Some research suggests your own pain processing systems can echo a faint version of what you're witnessing, as if some quiet part of you volunteers to feel a fraction of it too. You don't just understand what someone's feeling. Some part of you briefly feels it in your own chest, your own stomach, before you've had time to decide whether you want it to. That used to be enormously useful. The person who senses unrest in a group before it turns into something worse is valuable to have around. Today, it mostly means a doom scroll session can wreck your entire afternoon, because your nervous system doesn't fully distinguish between a stranger's tragedy on a screen and something happening to someone you love. If one of these already feels familiar, tell me in the comments which one hits closest: reading people, absorbing emotions, or needing silence afterward. 3. Ordinary environments can feel like an assault. Most brains have a built-in filter, usually credited to a structure called the thalamus, that quietly mutes the hum of the air conditioner, the coworker's gum chewing, the perfume 3 seats over, so you can focus on what matters. In people with the gain turned up, that filter runs looser. Everything comes in at roughly the same volume. The keyboard clatter, the overhead lights, the second conversation happening behind you, the buzz of the fridge in the next room, the chair scraping 2 tables over. This is also why loud bars, packed festivals, and violent movies hit differently for you. Your body reacts to a scary scene almost like it's happening to you. Stomach twisting, eyes wanting to look away, even while your logical mind knows perfectly well it's just a film. This isn't low tolerance. It's an open gate that never learned to selectively close. And by the time most people are just settling into a room, you've already absorbed more of it than they will all night. 4. You don't recharge by going out. You recharge by disappearing. After absorbing everyone else's tone, the room's noise, and half the internet's bad news, something in you needs to power all the way down. Not a coffee with a friend, a dark, quiet room where nobody's asking you for anything, where the only sound is whatever you choose to let in. There is a real body-level reason for this. Your system needs time to settle after hours of sensory and emotional input. Skip that recovery window and you don't just feel tired. You go flat, irritable, hard to reach, the version of yourself that makes people ask, "Why are you always so quiet when you get home?" You're not annoyed at them. You're just running on an empty tank that fills back up in silence, not in company. And pretending otherwise for one more social hour usually costs you 2 hours of recovery later. 5. Conflict doesn't feel like disagreement to you. It feels like danger. For most people, a tense conversation is uncomfortable. For you, a sharp tone or sudden criticism can trigger something closer to a genuine alarm response. The brain's threat center takes over before your thinking brain gets a vote. Sometimes that alarm freezes you in place. You go blank in an argument, unable to find your words, even when you know you're right and could list every reason why an hour later, alone, replaying it. And sometimes the alarm skips the freeze entirely. It jumps straight to keeping the peace before conflict even has a chance to start. That is why, days later, a coworker's text asking you to cover their shift can get a reflexive "sure, no problem" out of you in under 3 seconds flat. Even while every cell in your exhausted body was hoping to say no. Phone still warm in your hand from how fast you typed it. Neither of these is weakness. Saying yes when you meant no, or freezing instead of arguing back, are both your nervous system doing the same thing, trying to keep the peace before you've consciously decided that peace is worth the cost. If you've said yes to something you didn't have room for in under 5 seconds this month, remember that word, static. You'll see why it fits in a minute. 6. Your memory doesn't file things away. It keeps them warm, sitting close to the surface long after it should have cooled. You can forget what you had for breakfast and still remember, in full sensory detail, the exact look on someone's face when you disappointed them a decade ago, the tone, the silence after, where you were standing, even the temperature of the room. That's because emotionally loaded moments don't get stored as flat facts in your memory. They get stored the way you experience them, which means remembering one can bring the original feeling most of the way back with it. Once, this kept people alive. The ones who remembered exactly where the danger was warned everyone else. Now, with no predators left to track, that same gift mostly gets turned inward, replaying a comment from months ago at 1 a.m. for no reason you can point to. Your chest tightening over something that's already over and can't be changed. 7. Beauty doesn't just please you. It can undo you a little. Here's the part that rarely gets mentioned alongside all of this. If your system amplifies pain, it amplifies everything else too. A song can send something like an electric current down your spine. A real, documented response researchers call frisson. A particular slant of evening light can stop you mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-thought, for no reason you could explain to whoever's standing next to you. Other people see a nice painting. You might stand in front of one and feel your throat tighten, because you're not just looking at brushstrokes. You're catching something like the emotional signature underneath them. A smell can put you back inside a whole year of your life in half a second, unannounced, uninvited, gone again before you can hold on to it. This is the quiet upside to everything else on this list. The same wiring that makes a crowded room exhausting is what makes an ordinary Tuesday sunset feel like it's speaking directly to you, for no reason anyone standing next to you would understand. Now, here's the distinction worth being honest about, because these 7 traits can come from 2 different places. There's a version of this that's simply how your nervous system was built, a genuine, well-documented temperament that shows up early in life and stays fairly stable across the years. That version isn't a wound. It doesn't need fixing, only the right conditions to not be exhausting. You can usually tell it's this version because, even on the hard days, there's an underlying steadiness to it. You're tired, not afraid. And there's a version that looks nearly identical on the surface, but is doing something different underneath. A nervous system that learned to stay on high alert because, at some point, it had good reason to. Old hypervigilance from a hard chapter of your life can produce almost the same symptoms. The scanning for danger in every tone shift, the freezing in conflict, the inability to say no without your stomach dropping. This version tends to feel less like steadiness and more like a low current of dread that never fully switches off, even in rooms that are safe. The difference matters because one is a setting to work with, and the other is a wound that may need more than boundary setting to heal. Sometimes that means talking to someone trained to help with exactly that, not just watching another video about it. Neither one makes you broken, but they're not quite the same story, and it's worth being honest with yourself about which one you're actually living, instead of assuming every hard feeling is just how you're wired and stopping the inquiry there. If it's the first, if this has simply always been how you're built, the work isn't becoming less sensitive. It's building a life your setting can actually survive in. Fewer things on the calendar than everyone else seems to need. Real recovery time treated as non-negotiable instead of a luxury you feel guilty for taking, and permission to leave a loud room without a lengthy explanation to anyone. If some part of it feels more like the second, like you're not just sensitive but genuinely on guard, all the time, everywhere, even in rooms that have never hurt you, that's worth paying attention to and worth more support than a video can give you. Noticing the difference isn't a small thing. It's often the first honest question that leads somewhere. Either way, here's one small, doable thing to try this week. The next time you feel the pull to say yes to something you don't have room for, pause for 10 seconds before answering. Not to force a no, just to let the automatic yes lose its head start, long enough for you to actually check what you have left to give before your fingers answer for you. 10 seconds won't undo a lifetime of the reflex, but it's long enough to notice you have one. You're not too much. You're not broken, and you're not imagining any of this. Your system learned to run with the gain turned higher than most people's, in a world mostly built for the default setting. That has a real cost. Sore ears in loud rooms, longer recovery times, a memory that holds on to things you'd rather it dropped, a body that keeps score even when your mind has already moved on. And on the good days, when the conditions are right, it's also the exact reason you notice things, feel things, and create things that most people walk straight past without ever seeing at all. If this helped you understand why you feel everything so deeply, give it a like. Send it to someone who gets overwhelmed by the world but never knows how to explain it. Subscribe for more videos about the psychology behind behaviors most people misunderstand.